At Starbound, we tell stories the human way, not with artificial voices or AI slop. In the end, what's HFY without humanity? My name's Carol. Let's begin.
The class was about to learn a very simple rule for fighting humans. The most dangerous thing you can do isn't killing them. And the faint, musky scent of a dozen different alien species feigning boredom. The atmosphere was a mix of sterile filtration and something predatory. The impact slammed Ayla Quinn to the mat. Air fled her lungs in a silent gasp. Her own inside seemed to claw for an exit. Above her, Cadet Grawl of the Drakkar kin loomed, a mountain of slate-gray scales and coiled muscle. Each plate of his natural armor overlapped in a geological formation. His shadow fell over her, heavy with contempt and a quarter-ton of predatory evolution. "Is the soft worlder napping?" he rumbled. The universal translator in her ear rendered his guttural Drakkar tongue into perfect standard. The condescension felt like another layer of gravity. "Perhaps the G-force is too much for its delicate constitution. Shall I fetch it a juice box and a blanket?" Around the arena's perimeter, the other cadets, a menagerie of galactic evolution's greatest hits and strangest B-sides, offered a few chuckles. Two chitinids hooted with laughter, their smaller, dexterous chest limbs clapping in approval. A hulking ursine Ugor grunted in amusement. Most just watched with a cold, analytical curiosity, like biologists observing an animal's final moments. This was a sanctioned high-gravity sparring match, but everyone knew its true purpose. A lesson in hierarchy, delivered with a backhand for the entire academy to witness. Perched on a viewing rail, Ensign Phaline fluttered her delicate, membranous wings, which shifted colors from violet to green with every anxious movement. The tick was her only physical outlet for the distress that churned inside her. Her species, the Alais, possessed hollow bones and breathtaking intellect. To them, violence was a vulgarity, a failure of communication. Watching this scene felt like an assault, a symphony played on broken instruments. On a raised platform overlooking the entire hall, Commander Zeth stood motionless, a sculpture of polished volcanic glass. The 6 sensory pits arranged across his smooth head tracked the proceedings without a flicker. Each pit processed a different spectrum of data: thermal, kinetic, biological. His purpose was observation, not fairness. He was a scientist cataloging a reaction. The subject's survival was secondary to the quality of the data. Ayla coughed, a dry, racking sound that scraped her throat raw. The extra half-G of the training floor was an invisible beast squatting on her chest. She rolled onto her side, every muscle screaming, and pushed herself back to her feet. The world swam for a moment, a blurry watercolor of harsh lights and alien faces, before it resolved back into painful clarity. She spit a wad of blood onto the pristine white mat. The red stain was an answer. Earlier that morning, the institutional gray of the academy felt heavier than usual. In the high-G gymnasium, the air hummed with the strain of exotic physiologies at their limits. Ayla lay on a weight bench, her knuckles white, as she strained against a bar heavy enough to crush her. Under the floor's amplified gravity, the exercise felt like an attempt to bench press a small, furious moon. Her muscles, those hopelessly terrestrial bundles of protein, screamed with fire and lactic acid. A few feet away, a chitinid cadet named Kim curled twice that weight with his powerful lower arms. His smaller upper chest limbs scrolled through a datapad. His breath became easy, the occasional huff from his 4 nostrils a sound of boredom, not exertion. He and his friends had a few names for her. Jelly Bones, earned after the 0G maneuvering drills. Oxygen Waster, when she finished last in the endurance runs. Pet Project, for moments they thought she was out of earshot, a nod to the rumor of Commander Zeth's personal sponsorship. Kim grunted. He racked his weights with a clang that echoed through the cavernous gym, a sound of dismissal. "Still trying to lift the nursery weights, Taryn?" He called over, barely glancing at her. His friends, The Ugor and a slender, serpentine being called a Lamian snickered. "Careful, Kim." The Ugor rumbled, his voice like rocks in a tumbler. "You might hurt its feelings. Terrans possess a famous emotional instability." "How can you hurt the feelings of a training dummy?" Kim shot back, finally turning to look at her, a four-armed smirk spreading across his rocky features. Ayla offered no answer. She focused on her breathing, on the searing burn in her pectorals, on the will required to complete one more rep. Shouting back was their language, a waste of her own. Her language was the silent grind of one more repetition. Later, she found Phelan in the mess hall. The Alay carefully arranged her nutrient portions on her tray. The hall was a riot of sound and smell, 1,000 different biologies consuming 1,000 different fuels. Phelan's species evolved in low gravity and a thin atmosphere. Most considered them more physically fragile than humans, but their minds could cut nebula gas, and their diplomatic grace was legendary. No one called them oxygen wasters. Their contribution to the Concord was too obvious, too intellectual. They were respected. "They only see the shell," Phelan chirped, her own voice a series of melodic, clicking notes that the translator rendered into a soft, concerned whisper. She nudged a piece of her own sun-dried Solani fruit across the table with a delicate, three-fingered hand. The vibrant purple fruit smelled faintly of superheated ceramic and honey. "They remain blind to the engine inside." Ayla managed a tired smile and accepted the fruit. It tasted of sweet dust and sunshine, a welcome change from the bland, gray protein gel she squeezed from a tube onto her tray. "Thanks, Phelan. Sometimes I think that engine runs on fumes and sheer stubbornness." "An engine that runs on fumes and stubbornness is still an engine," Phelan countered. Her large, liquid black eyes held an earnestness that was almost painful. "Their engines run on arrogance, a powerful but brittle fuel. Yours runs on something else, something their sensors fail to detect." She tilted her head. "It must be exhausting, though, to carry the weight of your entire species on your shoulders." "You have no idea." Ayla sighed, pushing the gray gel around with her fork. "Every time I fail a drill, it's like the human failed. Every time I get winded on a run, it's, see, soft-worlders have no stamina. I feel less like a person and more like a data point." "Then give them better data," Phelan said, her voice direct. It was the voice she used for explaining complex orbital mechanics, simple and absolute. "Data is all they understand." The sterile light of the tactics classroom gleamed off Commander Zeth's polished frame, giving him the appearance of volcanic glass brought to life. He lectured on threat assessment, his voice a calm, clicking monotone that the translator rendered without inflection. He illustrated his point with a holographic replay of the Calypso Nebula catastrophe, where a Concord fleet misclassified a species of silicon-based lifeforms as slow, lumbering miners, and failed to account for their ability to weaponize seismic vibrations. 3 capital ships were shaken apart at the molecular level. "Optimal threat neutralization is predicted on accurate initial assessment," he said, his sensory pits scanning the room of cadets. "You misclassify your opponent, you miscalculate the required force application. The result is waste. Waste leads to failure. Failure leads to death. The universe gives no extra credit for effort. It rewards only correct answers." Cadet Graal's hand, thick as a dinner plate and tipped with dark claws, shot up. He refused to wait to be called on. His arrogance was a physical force. "Commander!" His voice boomed, a challenge in its very tone, silencing the quiet murmur of the class. "Speaking of misclassification, what is the strategic value of a species that requires atmospheric, gravitational, and psychological coddling to function? Their colony failure rate is astounding. Over half collapse from what their own records call unforeseen environmental stressors. For a Terran, a stiff breeze qualifies as an unforeseen environmental stressor. Their emotional responses are tactically catastrophic. By any logical metric, they are a liability, a drain on Concord resources. The class went silent. 100 pairs of eyes, or eye stalks, or optic sensors, all turned to Ayla. She stared straight ahead at the hologram of a shattered starship. Her face was neutral, while her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Zeth turned his head a full 180 degrees to face Graal, his body remaining perfectly still. The soft click, click, click of his internal neck joints was the only sound. Your metrics for strength, Cadet Graal, are limited to kinetic force and dermal resistance. The commander's voice droned, his tone unchanged. A simplistic, if common, error. You see a hammer and assume every problem is a nail. You neglect to factor in variables such as cohesion under extreme psychological pressure, resourcefulness in depleted environments, and biochemical resilience. He paused. The data on Terrans remains incomplete. The statement offered no defense. The words formed a hypothesis waiting for a test, a calm, clinical invitation for a demonstration. In the hyper-competitive, predator-filled halls of the Concordance Flight Academy, such invitations were seldom declined. The air in the combat hall was thick with anticipation. The usual pre-drill chatter had died, replaced by a focused quiet. This felt less like a training drill and more like a public dissection. Zeth's voice echoed from the hall speakers, as dispassionate as ever. The drill's objective is submission. Efficiency is the metric for success. Training safeties on the arena floor are set to minimal. Medical teams are on standby. Graal stepped forward, his heavy, clawed feet thudding on the mat with finality. He cracked his neck, a sound like stone grinding on stone, a display of casual power. His eyes, reptilian slits of burnished gold, locked onto Ayla. He ignored her as a person and saw her only as a symbol. "Commander," he announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall, a grand declaration for all to hear. "I volunteer to complete your data set on Terran fragility." On his platform, Zeth gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod of his head. This was the closest he ever came to showing enthusiasm. Cadet Graal has presented a hypothesis. His voice announced from the speakers. "Cadet Quinn, you will serve as the test subject. The experiment is authorized. Proceed." Phelan wanted to shout, to object, to scream that this was a mauling sanctioned by the highest authority, a public execution disguised as a drill. She knew the Academy's rigid, unforgiving regulations. A challenge acknowledged by a superior officer must be met. Refusal meant forfeiting your honor and your place at the Academy. Ayla was trapped in a cage made of rules and expectations. Graal moved with a lazy, predatory grace, circling her like a great shark circles a drowning swimmer. He kept his arms loose at his sides, his posture relaxed. This display was pure contempt. He kept his fist open for the first strike. A closed fist would imply he saw her as a worthy opponent. Instead, he swung a contemptuous backhand. The scales on his knuckles were rough, like jagged stone. The blow caught Ayla across the face with the force of a meteoroid, snapping her head to the side with a sickening crack that echoed in the quiet hall. The world dissolved into a brief, blinding flash of white light and the sound of a bell tolling inside her skull. She stumbled backward, her legs turning to rubber, landing hard on the mat. The taste of blood, coppery and sharp, filled her mouth as her own teeth sliced the inside of her cheek. The first wave of laughter washed over her from the spectators, sharp and cruel as broken glass. It stung more than the hit. It was the sound of confirmation. of 100 beings sighing in collective relief that the universe was exactly as they'd always thought it was. She pushed herself up. Her jaw throbbed with a deep, percussive rhythm. Her vision swam, 2 Gralls wavering in front of her. She ignored the pain, the humiliation, the roaring in her ears. She offered nothing in return. No glare, no cry. She just settled back into a defensive stance, learned from a 2-dimensional instructional video. Her body screamed, while her mind became a block of cold, stubborn ice. Her resilience earned no respect. The act only seemed to annoy Graal. It was as if a training dummy had inexplicably righted itself after being knocked over. It was unimpressive. It just delayed the inevitable, a glitch in the program. The second strike was a kick. There was no art to it. It was a brutal, thudding stomp meant to break down a reinforced door or crush the engine block of a ground car. Graal drove his heavy, scaled leg into her side, aiming for her floating ribs with casual indifference. It connected with devastating, bone-breaking force. Ayla heard more than felt, a loud, wet crack as the rib gave way, splintering and puncturing something soft inside her. The world dissolved again, this time into a pinprick of white-hot, all-consuming pain that eclipsed all other sensations. She collapsed, curling into a fetal position on the mat, unable to gasp for air, her lungs refusing to obey her brain's frantic commands. The laughter from the crowd grew louder, more assured. The experiment proceeded as expected. The hypothesis was proven correct. See? Fragile. On his platform, Zeth watched the holographic display of Ayla's vitals, his sensory pits processing the data streams with unnerving speed. Heart rate climbing to a fatal rhythm. Blood pressure, critical and rising. Respiratory function, compromised. Her left lung shredded. But the biochemical panel held his absolute, unwavering attention. A flood of information that looked less like a medical emergency and more like a reactor breach. A hormonal flooding began. Endorphins, enkephalins, adrenaline, norepinephrine. A chemical cocktail so potent it should have rendered her unconscious from shock. It was her body's last-ditch effort to numb the pain before total system failure. It was the biological equivalent of a white flag, the body's final surrender. But she failed to surrender. The chemical flood refused to shut her down. It built upon itself. A feedback loop began. Each chemical spike triggering another, stronger one. Against all medical and biological logic, she stirred. A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers and cut the laughter short. She planted her hands on the mat, her arms trembling under the strain as if trying to lift the weight of the whole world. Her movements were stiff, agonizing, a broken puppet trying to pull its own strings. She pushed herself up again, first to her knees, then, with a choked groan that was half pain and half effort, to her feet. Ayla Quinn, cadet of the Concordance Flight Academy, checked out. Something else punched the clock. Her body was a container now, and the thing inside was old and deeply uninterested in diplomacy. Her frame trembled violently, a seizure caused not by weakness or fear, but by a staggering amount of raw power seeking a release valve. Her textbook defensive stance evaporated, melted by a chemical fire. A low, weight-bearing crouch replaced it, a posture pulled from a genetic memory 1,000,000 years deep, when her ancestors huddled around fires, listening to things with teeth roar in the dark. The stance prioritized stability and forward momentum above all else. Her head was down, her sweat-soaked hair obscuring her face. But then, she looked up. The cadets who had been laughing moments before fell silent. A few of them shuffled back from the railing. They didn't decide to move. Their hindbrains made the decision for them. The pressure of her own blood burst the capillaries in Ayla's eyes. The whites became a bruised, bloody red that crept into the irises. turning them into black holes ringed with fire. Her teeth were bared, not in a snarl of anger, but in a rictus of pure physiological function, a tool for tearing. A low, guttural sound escaped her lips, half breath, half growl. The sound of an engine redlining just before it tears itself apart. The translator registered the noise as a low-frequency vibration and offered no linguistic equivalent. The laughter in the hall died, replaced by a sudden, chilling quiet. Grawl, who had been enjoying his dominance display, felt a cold spike of something ancient and unpleasant in the base of his brain. He took an involuntary step back, a motion he had not made in a combat ring since he was a juvenile. His predator's brain, honed over millennia of Drakkar warriors hunting the most dangerous beasts in their sector, screamed a single, nonsensical word at him. Wrong. He saw no display of defiance. This was a change in state. The solid was becoming a liquid. The herbivore was growing fangs. The prey was becoming something else. Something for which he had no data. Something that had no place in his ordered universe of strong and weak. Inside Ayla's skull, the world flattened into a tactical display. The searing agony in her side was no longer pain. It was a flashing icon. Structural damage, torso, sector 3. Pneumothorax imminent. Functional impact, moderate. Proceed. The sound of her own ragged, wet breathing was just an audio input monitoring oxygen saturation levels. The jeering faces of the cadets were blurred, irrelevant background data, heat signatures on the outside of primary operational theater. Her consciousness, the part of her that was still Ayla Quinn, who liked old earth music and missed the smell of rain on soil, relinquished the controls. It became a terrified passenger, strapped into the back of a careening war machine, watching a primal diagnostic program run its course. A single directive flashed in her mind's eye, overriding all the others, written in fire. Threat detected. Lethal proximity. Objective, neutralize. Survival is the only directive. On his platform, Zeth leaned forward a fraction of a millimeter, the most dramatic gesture anyone had ever seen him make. He whispered into his private comms, his voice for the first time holding a trace of something other than pure logic. It sounded like scientific awe. My word, he clicked softly. A full-scale sympathoadrenal reaction. She's entered a state of terminal metabolism. Norepinephrine levels are surging beyond measurable limits. Endorphin production has completely severed the neurological connection to her pain receptors. Fascinating. Before Grawl could recalibrate his strategy from bully to fighter, she moved. Grace, technique, and martial arts were absent. Only a horrifyingly functional, ground-eating scramble remained. The gait of an ape-descended creature, built for relentless, ugly pursuit across sun-scorched plains. She closed the 10-foot distance between them in a staggering burst of speed that seemed to tear at her own limbs, the tendons in her legs groaning audibly. She led with neither fist nor foot. She slammed her entire body, a projectile of meat and bone and furious purpose, into his midsection. The impact was jarring. Grawl grunted, stumbling back a step. He was much, much larger. He stayed on his feet, surprised by the sheer kinetic force, but fundamentally unharmed. Annoyance turned to cold fury. The lesson was over. This creature needed to be put down. He swung a heavy, clawed arm down in a crushing arc, a blow meant to shatter her spine and end the disgusting display. Ayla took the blow. She made no attempt to dodge or block. She turned into it. She absorbed the crushing impact with her shoulder and clavicle and used the momentum to spin herself closer. Her collarbone shattered with a sound like a frozen tree branch snapping, loud enough to be heard across the hall. The detached observer in her mind noted the new data point instantly. Left arm control, compromised. Motor function negligible. acceptable loss. The pain signal arrived a full second later, but it was just more data, immediately suppressed and filed under non-critical. Her body did not stop. It did not flinch. The impact had brought her inside his guard, flush against his torso. She drove her right fist into the softer, less armored scales of his abdomen, just below his own ribcage. There was another wet, crunching sound. It was not him. It was her. Her own knuckles and metacarpals, bones never meant to strike scaled armor that could deflect small arms' fire, had just turned to dust inside her fist. Right hand, non-functional. Structural integrity, 0%. Adapting. She left the broken hand where it was. The pain was irrelevant. The damage was a sunk cost. She abandoned punching and slammed forward, driving the point of her elbow into the same bruised spot on his abdomen. Then, again with her forearm. Each blow was clumsy, artless, but delivered with the full, desperate weight of her body. It was like being hammered with a meat-wrapped crowbar. Grawl was in shock. His entire life, his entire culture, was built on the fundamental understanding that pain is a stop sign. Damage is a reason to disengage, reevaluate, and attack from a new angle. Injury is a signal from the body that it is time to cease activity. This thing in front of him treated catastrophic, crippling injury as a minor inconvenience, a tactical variable. It was like fighting a machine that was tearing off its own parts to use as weapons. He felt her sharp elbow grinding against his abdomen, and his mind simply could not process the input. He attempted a ritualized parry, a sweeping block that was just as much a dominance display as a defensive move. Every warrior species in the Concord understood the gesture. It meant yield or be broken. She ignored the gesture. She walked through it, absorbing the blow to her already broken shoulder just to get closer, her blood-red eyes fixed on him with a single-minded focus that was devoid of malice or anger. It was pure, terrifying function. He was the predator. He was the apex. He was Grawl of the Drakarkin, whose ancestors had slain leviathans in the methane seas of their homeworld. But for the first time in his life, he felt a cold, slithering sensation he had only ever inspired in others. He felt like prey. As she continued her relentless, self-destructive assault, a sound erupted from her lungs. This was not a warrior's cry or a cry of pain. It was a scream of pure, unfiltered, pre-linguistic human fury. This was the sound of an ancient ancestor watching a predator stalk their child. The sound of a desperate hunt against starvation. The sound of rage, terror, and a stubborn refusal to die, all boiled down to its sonic essence, a shockwave of pure survival instinct. The raw audio, a shriek of pure chaos, hit the alien cadets on a primal level. The avians ruffled their feathers in distress. The insectoids froze, their antennae twitching wildly. The mammals bared their teeth in a reflexive, confused response. It was a sound their orderly, advanced cultures bred out of themselves eons ago, the sound of the savage wilderness from which they had all clawed their way. Phelan shrieked her name. Ayla! A desperate, melodic plea to the friend she no longer recognized, but the sound was swallowed by the horrifying noise pouring from Ayla's own throat. Ayla tackled Grawl, her relentless, insane forward momentum finally overwhelming his stunned defense. They crashed to the floor, a tangle of limbs in desperation. He was dazed, disoriented, his combat instincts completely useless against this biological storm of self-immolation. He was a master duelist trying to fight a forest fire. Pinned beneath her, his head ringing, he saw her gaze fix on something. Not his eyes, not his throat. It was the ornate, blade-like crest that extended from the nape of his neck down his spine. It was a symbol of his clan's lineage, a feature of Drakar pride for 10,000 years, an extension of his own vertebrae. Her one good hand, the left one,
shot out and gripped the base of the crest where it met his skull. Her broken right arm pressed against his shoulder, pinning him down with the dead weight of her body. The observer in her mind supplied the final tactical analysis. Target, structural weakness, cervical junction, exploit. She used his own bulk against him, planting her feet and pulling, not with the strength of her arm, but by leveraging her entire body weight backward. It was a simple, brutal application of physics. There was a horrifying, grating crack of stressed bone, like a great tree splitting in a lightning storm. She twisted, putting the last of her adrenal fuel in the motion. The crest snapped at its base with a final, sickening crunch. Graal's body went limp beneath her, his nervous system severed in a single, catastrophic instant. The arena fell silent. It was a profound quiet, the kind that follows a catastrophic explosion when the air itself seems to have been stunned into submission. Ayla staggered to her feet, swaying like a broken doll held up by sheer inertia. Blood dripped from her face, from her ruined right hand, from a dozen smaller wounds she had not even registered. In her one functional hand, she held the broken spinal crest of Graal the Drakerkin. It was over a foot long, a gruesome banner of serrated bone. She held it aloft. This was no gesture of triumph or victory. She held it as a predator displays its kill, a silent, biological statement to any other threats in the vicinity. This is what happens. This is the outcome. Reevaluate your threat assessment. Then, the flood receded. The tidal wave of adrenaline and endorphins that had held her together started to drain away, leaving devastation in its wake. The world of pain and sound and consequence came rushing back in a dizzying, nauseating wave. Her eyes, still blood red, cleared. The primal machine shut down. And Ayla Quinn, the girl from Iowa who just wanted to prove her people were worthy, returned to find herself in a nightmare. She looked at the gruesome trophy in her hand, her mind struggling to comprehend what it was. Then she looked down at the unmoving body at her feet, at the horrific wound she had created. A wave of pure horror crashed over her. Her strength vanished, her legs gave out. She collapsed onto the blood-stained mat, unconscious before she hit the ground. For a moment that stretched into an eternity, no one moved. The 100 or so cadets in the observation gallery were frozen statues of disbelief and terror. The arrogant chuckles and condescending smirks were gone, replaced with wide eyes and slack jaws. Kim the Chitinid stared, all 4 of his limbs hanging limply at his sides. The Uyghur who had joked about her feelings looked pale beneath his thick fur. They had come to see a lesson in hierarchy. They had just witnessed a violation of the natural order. Then, the alarms blared, their strident electronic shrieks cutting through the stunned quiet. Medical teams in sterile white uniforms swarmed the arena floor, their anti-grav drones buzzing anxiously over the 2 bodies, their programming struggling to prioritize between the 2 catastrophic sets of injuries. Phelan was the first one to break through the stunned crowd, launching herself from the railing and landing with a flutter of wings. She slid to her knees beside Ayla's unconscious form, her delicate feathers ruffled in distress, her melodic voice calling her friend's name in a choked whisper. But Commander Zeth moved with a chilling, deliberate calm. He descended from his platform, his steps measured. He ignored the frantic medics trying to stabilize Ayla. He ignored the grim pronouncements from the team working on Graal. He walked to the spreading pool of Ayla's blood, knelt with a soft click of his joints, and produced a micro-sampler from a hidden pouch in his uniform. He carefully took a specimen, the device whirring softly as it catalogued the hormonal and cellular makeup of the sample. He then moved to Graal's body. His scanner emitted a low hum as he documented the wounds, the crushed abdomen, the clean cervical fracture. His movements were slow, almost reverent, like an archaeologist who had just unearthed the remains of a forgotten, violent god. He muttered quietly to his personal recorder. Tissue damage on the subject's hand is self-inflicted. She tore her own ligaments to achieve greater range of motion. Fascinating. Utterly wasteful from a long-term survival perspective, yet maximally effective for immediate threat neutralization. He straightened up, his 6 sensory pits taking in the entire scene of carnage. He looked at the broken human girl, the dead Drakkar warrior, and the terrified faces of the future leaders of the Galactic Concord. Then he spoke into his private comms, his voice as flat and emotionless as ever. Data abundant. Ayla woke to the sterile smell of Bacta and the gentle, rhythmic hum of a medical monitor. Her body was a constellation of deep, throbbing aches, sharp pains from surgically repaired fractures, and the phantom itch of accelerated nerve regeneration. She was encased from the neck down in a light, flexible medical gel that held her bones in place and infused her tissues with healing nanites. It felt like being submerged in lukewarm jelly. Phelan was there, perched on a stool beside the bed, her head bowed, her wings drooping. She seemed to have gone without sleep. She looked up the moment Ayla's eyes fluttered open, her face a mixture of profound relief and deep concern. The memories had returned. Not as a coherent sequence, but as brutal, disjointed flashes, seen through a red filter. The laughter, the crack of her own bones, the world turning into a cold, logical schematic, the weight of the bone crest in her hand, the blood. I killed him, Phelan, Ayla whispered, her voice hoarse and raw from the scream she barely remembered making. A single tear traced a path through the grime on her cheek. I couldn't stop. I was just watching. Phelan reached out and took Ayla's uninjured hand, the one that had not been rebuilt from the paste and bone splinters, her touch surprisingly warm and steady. I saw your eyes, Ayla, she said softly. That was a different you. It was something older, something that lives in the basement of your species, I think. My people have stories about it, the ancestor song, a part of the mind that only wakes up when the world is ending. Ayla shook her head, the motion small and weak. It was a monster. No, Phelan insisted, her grip tightening slightly. A monster kills for pleasure or power. Grawl was being a monster. That thing. It was fighting to exist in a universe that was trying to erase it. It was solving a problem, the most terrifyingly direct way possible. She shuddered. It treated its own body like a disposable tool. The words offered a strange, unsettling comfort. They offered no absolution, but the framing helped her shattered mind begin to process the horror. She was a weapon that had, against all odds, fired. Commander Zeth stood before a council of grim-faced Academy administrators. The holographic faces of a dozen species stared down at him with varying degrees of outrage and concern. They spoke of expulsion. They spoke of sanctions against the Sol system. They spoke of a full, immediate review and likely termination of the, quote, Terran experiment. Zeth was silent until they had exhausted their initial fury. Then, with a calm gesture, he activated the holoprojector in the center of the chamber. A 3-dimensional model of Ayla's vitals during the fight filled the room. It was a chaotic symphony of jagged red lines, biochemical alerts, and cascading system warnings that looked more like a star going supernova than a biological life form. You see a loss of control, Zeth stated, his monotone cutting through the lingering anger in the room. A failure of discipline. A descent into savagery. He let the words hang,
then continued. Your assessment is flawed. The Ugor High Chancellor growled, his leonine face tight with fury. Flawed? Commander, your specimen murdered another cadet in a sanctioned drill. Correction. Zeth clicked. Cadet Grawl initiated a formal dominance challenge. By his own clan's laws, any response was permissible. Cadet Quinn's response was simply more effective than he anticipated. Zeth magnified the data, the red lines climbing to extraordinary heights. Observe. Her core temperature approached terminal protein denaturation. Her blood pH plummeted into severe acidosis. The chemical reaction was consuming her own muscle and organ tissue for fuel. This is a process known as rhabdomyolysis, taken to a lethal extreme. An allied diplomat on the council whispered, her translated voice trembling. By the great dark, she was dying on her feet. Precisely, Zeth confirmed, turning to the diplomat's hologram. Unchecked, this state would have resulted in irreversible neurological damage, cardiac arrest, and total organ failure within minutes. She was metabolically self-destructing to achieve victory. He then brought up the anthropological files from Earth. Your error is in your classification. You labeled Terrans a Tier 4 soft-worlder species. This is like classifying a supernova as a flickering candle. The data now suggests a new classification. Tier 1 Persistence Class Anomaly. They are defined by their astonishing ability to endure damage, to metabolize it, to convert it into fuel until the opponent is no longer a factor. They do not break, they do not shatter. They escalate. He let the statement sink in. The council chamber was now filled with a stunned contemplation. We witnessed a student murdering another, Zeth concluded. We witnessed a biological weapon of last resort, forged by millions of years of survival on a planet that tried very, very hard to kill them. A weapon this Concord desperately needs to understand. And now, finally, we have the data to begin. The Academy transformed overnight. Ayla faced no expulsion. Graal's death was officially ruled a training fatality, resulting from a gross miscalculation of opponent capabilities. A new section appeared in the Digital Academy Charter, broadcast to every cadet's datapad, with a mandatory acknowledgement receipt. It was titled, with Zeth's typical clinical flair, Quinn Procedure, Special Engagement Directives for Species 213A, parentheses, Terran. In a crowded training room, Kim the Chitinid grimly read the key points to a group of nervous, newly arrived rookies. His usual arrogant swagger was gone, replaced by a somber seriousness that looked utterly alien on his rocky face. Listen up, you lumps, he growled, his 4 limbs crossed over his massive chest. Section 2, Rule 1. In any unsanctioned engagement with a Terran cadet, that means a scuffle in the mess hall, a disagreement in the barracks, anything, you are to disengage immediately. I care little about who started it. Do not corner them. Do not incapacitate them. You disengage and you walk away. Is that clear? The rookies nodded, their various appendages trembling slightly. Good. Kim grunted. Section 3, Rule 2. During sanctioned sparring, if the Terran subject's vitals cross the persistence threshold, now officially designated as a Quinn event, the acting proctor is authorized to use escalating levels of tranquilizer gas. If that fails... He paused, taking a deep breath from all 4 nostrils. If that fails, lethal force is authorized on the Terran. A murmur of shock went through the rookies. A small, furry cadet fainted. Kim slammed a fist on the table. Quiet. You think that this is for our protection? It is for theirs. The final report concluded that Quinn's metabolic reaction would have resulted in terminal organ failure within 90 seconds of Graal's neutralization. She was literally burning herself to death to win.
He stared at the young faces before him, his expression deadly serious.
The procedure exists because the most dangerous thing in the galaxy to a human pushed too far is themselves.
The social dynamics of the academy were permanently altered. The whispers and taunts directed at Ayla stopped. They were replaced by something else. A wide berth and a pervasive, uneasy quiet. A week after her release from the medbay, she walked into the crowded mess hall, tray in hand. The usual cacophony of 100 species eating and talking died down, not to silence, but to a low, respectful murmur. A massive, bull-like Ugor cadet, the same one who had laughed at her in the gym, was holding court at a central table. He saw her enter. His booming voice faltered mid-sentence. He cleared his throat, suddenly found the synthetic protein cubes on his plate intensely interesting, and fell completely silent. A wave of quiet followed Ayla as she walked to her usual table, where Phelan was waiting with a small, supportive smile. As she passed Kim's table, he and his friends stopped eating. They refused to look at her, but they only resumed their conversation after she was seated. The message was more powerful than any spoken apology. The joke was gone. She was an eventuality, a variable that had to be accounted for. A week later, a delegation from the Drakarkin arrived. They strode through the Academy's main concourse in full ceremonial armor, etched with the histories of their ancestors, their scaled faces grim, their movements rigid. The Academy staff braced for a diplomatic firestorm, demands for justice, for retribution, for blood. The lead delegate, a towering warrior whose facial scars and ornate armor marked him as a clan chieftain, approached Ayla where she stood waiting, flanked by Phelan and a nervous-looking Academy administrator. The delegate was Graal's father. He stopped before her, his golden reptilian eyes boring into hers. He radiated a profound, warrior's respect that was more intimidating than any rage. He and his retinue performed a short, guttural ritual, thumping their armored chest with closed fists and chanting a single, resonant word. Then, Graal's father spoke, his voice a low rumble that the translator rendered with solemn gravity. He mourned his son's life less than he honored the glory of his death. He produced a small, wickedly sharp blade, carved from the bone of a great sandworm of the Drakar's anvil. He offered it to her, hilt first. "My son sought to test the unknown," the father's translated voice intoned. "He sought to prove the strength of our ways against a new variable. He found it. He died against a foe who would tear itself apart to achieve victory. In our culture, there is no greater death. There is no higher honor. He will be sung of in the sagas of our clan for generations." He pushed the blade into her hands. It was heavy and cold. "You have earned a warrior's name among our people. From this day forward, you will be known to the Drakar as Kesh Ayla Tar." The administrator beside her gasped, whispering to Taylor, "That name, it means the one who ends the fight." Months later, the scars on Ayla's body had faded to pale lines against her skin. The scars on her mind were another matter, but they were no longer gaping wounds. She stood with Phelan at a massive viewport on the observation deck, looking out at the swirling colors of the Serpent's Coil Nebula. A new, quiet confidence surrounded her. She walked with her head held high, the burning need to prove herself extinguished. The data was in. The experiment was complete. She understood now what her people brought to the galactic table. It was neither elegant starship design nor transcendent philosophy. They offered neither overwhelming physical power nor innate grace. They brought the terrifying, unglamorous, and utterly unbreakable ability
to simply keep going when everything else would stop. The soft, deliberate clicks of approaching footsteps announced the arrival of Commander Zeth. He stopped beside them, his 6 sensory pits gazing out at the nebula for a moment before turning to Ayla. His usual clinical demeanor was now tinged with something new. It was a deep, boundless curiosity. "Cadet Quinn," he clicked, his voice its usual monotone. "We have designed a new simulation for the advanced command track, a no-win scenario, an unwinnable engagement based on a historical footnote from your own people's naval traditions. Kobayashi Maru, I believe it is called." He paused, tilting his head slightly. "Threat level, cataclysmic. Resource availability, critical. Probability of success, a statistical ghost. Standard tactical doctrine from all 112 major Concord species dictates strategic withdrawal. Every simulation we have run ends in failure." He turned his body to face her fully. "We are interested in your species' approach to unwinnable odds." Ayla turned from the star-dusted view, a small, knowing smile touching her lips for the first time since the day in the combat hall. It was a smile without happiness, without kindness, but it was real. It was the smile of someone who finally understood the engine inside her and was no longer afraid of it. "Commander," she said, her voice clear and steady. "An unwinnable fight is a myth. There is only the one you choose to stop fighting.